My job? Well, my job is to listen. You don't call somebody who talks a lot and doesn't listen wise, do you? No, we have plenty of words to describe that kind of person, but wise isn't one of them. In my position, we look for signs everywhere, and we try to interpret what they mean to us. We even look at the stars in the sky. One time I had read of a star that would announce a new king, and suddenly out of nowhere, a star appeared. But this was a different kind of star. It was a beacon in the night. The more I studied that star, the more I came to realize and believe that that was the star the Jews were waiting for, the one that they had written about in their sacred scriptures, the star of the Messiah. So, we followed it. There were a few of us. This star was so different, it actually moved across the sky. It would lead, and we would follow. It led us to Jerusalem, and that's where we met Herod. We told Herod about the star and about the king, and he too said he wanted to worship the Messiah. He asked us, he demanded that once we find that king, that we come back and tell him so he could worship. But we knew better. We learned in a dream not to trust this man, so we took a different way home. The star continued to lead us from once it came in the sky to once it brought us to Judea. It was about 2 years. And suddenly the star stopped. And there it shined down, not on a palace fit for a king, but on a small cottage of a peasant. Well, this was it. We were excited. We gathered our gifts and our thoughts and tried to control our emotions because behind those doors was a new king. A king that commanded the movement of the stars in the sky, but chose to live amongst his people. 400 years of silence, and now God speaks. The Word became flesh and dwelled among men. That night, we kneeled down. Yes, we knelt down before the new king. We laid our gifts at his feet because we had to. 400 years of silence broken by the cries of a baby boy. He spoke, and we worshiped.
Those men taught us, those wise men taught us what's true, is that wise men use their brains to follow Jesus. Winston Churchill gave us an incredible quote. I want you to hear this. This will be the launch pad for today's message. To every person, there comes in their lifetime that special moment when you are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing, unique to you and your talents. What a tragedy it is if that moment finds you unprepared or unqualified for work which could have been your finest hour. Those wise men on that journey had been tapped for something very unique to them, something only they could have done. And God was signaling the world. He was telling us that wise men, really smart people, engage their brains to follow this star, to worship this king. That the wisest people with the best brains and the most talent bring their best gifts to worship Jesus Christ. That's the truth. That's the story of the Magi. That's the story of the wise men. And somehow, these wise men understood a prophecy, an Old Testament prophecy written hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus. And the prophecy goes like this. It's from Numbers, the book of Numbers, an Old Testament book. And here's the prophecy. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. And somehow these wise men from hundreds of miles away who weren't Jewish, who were from a totally different culture, who worshipped a totally different God. They worshipped a god named Zoroaster. They were Zoroastrian priests, most likely. And these were people that were studied and learned and in a mixture of astrology and astronomy. And somehow in their time, in their day, they were some of the best and brightest scientists on the planet. Now, before you get high and mighty and think, well, we're so much smarter now than they were then. Built a pyramid lately? I'm just saying, some of what was built in that era, in those regions, are better than anything we can build even today. So before you get puffed up and proud and think, well, we're the smartest people that have ever been, because it's like 2014, almost 2015, and we've got all this science and technology. Well, they had science and technology too. And they had ways of measuring things. We still can't figure out the precision of some of what they did in those times. So just because we don't know everything that they knew, don't assume that just because we're chronologically further in the calendar that we're smarter than they were. But these wise men represented the best and the brightest. They represented people who were studied in the science of that day, in the history of that time, and they were studied in religions. And the Zoroastrians would have came from a region where Israelites had been captives years before. So they would have studied ancient text that people like Daniel from the Old Testament would have had and would have provided them, and they would have learned together hundreds of years before in a context about Jews and their culture and about the Old Testament writings. And so now you see it coming all the way back around when these Zoroastrian priests, magi, wise men, kings, however you want to frame them, when they show up to worship at the feet of Christ. The best and the brightest of their time. And they came to worship him. Here's the story from Matthew 2. Here's the story you're familiar with. So listen to it this way. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose before them, went before them and came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and they worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. You see, wise men use their brains to follow Jesus. Wise men follow the star. They follow that tap on the shoulder to a place that brings them to a place of worship. It was Thomas Aquinas, 13th century saint, who said this: truth, God, is known through reason, science. Truth, God, can be known through science. They're not mutually exclusive endeavors. He went on and said this: the knowledge of God is the cause of things. For the knowledge of God is to all creatures what the knowledge of the artificer is to things made by his art. Some of you guys have noticed these cool Phos Church mugs that are around here right now. We've had handcrafted down in the Gatlinburg area. You may have seen some of those around here, and they're out back if you haven't. But those little mugs, they know something about the hands that made them, the way we know something about the God that made us. We know God because we're his handiwork, we're his art. I would go so far as to say that the heavens, all of creation, is the handiwork of God. Now, there is a war going on in our culture right now between Christmas and culture, between the news of Jesus and between culture. This war has been brewing for a long time. And it's something like this. It goes something along these lines. That if you believe in Jesus, you're not very smart. As a matter of fact, if you're a really good scientist, you cannot believe in Jesus. They're mutually exclusive endeavors. That's how our culture says it goes. When I was in college at the University of Kentucky, I was studying to be a biology and chemistry teacher. And when I entered the teacher education program there at UK, I was kind of shocked to learn the reason that a lot of my friends who were studying to be biology teachers, I was shocked to understand why they were there and what their mission in life was. Their mission in life, this was a mission for them. This wasn't just something they were thinking about. This was their mission. They wanted to go into the public schools and teach evolution. But do you know why they wanted to teach evolution? Because it was an attempt in their minds to kill God. I don't really care where you land on evolution, by the way. But their mission was not an atheism of the past. An atheism of the past was one that simply said, it's okay, you believe what you believe, I just don't believe there's a God, and that's okay. There is an aggressive, passionate, evangelistic atheism moving about right now. And this aggressive atheism wants to say to you, you cannot believe in God and embrace science. You cannot do both. And if you do both, you're moronic. You don't have a brain. I mean, it's just down a path where they just simply can't tolerate the embracing of both. And that's really coming to bear right now in our culture. It's a big thing that's happening. There is a war between Christmas and culture. You hear it if you get customer support right now. If you call into a company right now and get customer support, what do they say to you? Happy holidays. If you say to them, Merry Christmas back, they say, Happy holidays. They're not going to say it. And it's a minor representation of what's going on, this war between our culture and Christ, that there is a gap. So I have a mission to accomplish today. And I'll be right up front with what my mission is. I want to say to some of you who are incredibly bright, incredibly intelligent, incredibly gifted, the world is your oyster. You can do anything with your life right now that you want to do. I want to say to you, do not check your brains at the door to follow Jesus. Become the best, brightest scientist that you can. Go as far as you can with the brains that God has given you. Become the smartest person in your field of endeavor. Become the highest, most high caliber person in what you do, and follow Jesus too. Do both. It's possible. We need men and women to follow Jesus the way T.E. Lawrence says in this quote. He says this, he says, all men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day to find that it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day, these are dangerous people, for they may act their dream with open eyes to make it possible. And this is what I want to say to you, young people, hear me out. I want you to dream the biggest dreams you can, to be the best and the brightest in whatever field you choose. And if it's science and engineering, then go for it. If it's medicine, then go for it. If it's law, go for it. If it's politics, go for it. Become the best and the brightest and follow Jesus with your whole heart too. Do both. Engage your mind and engage your heart. Do both. Don't settle for being a lazy scientist. Be a brilliant scientist and follow Jesus too. It's possible. I do not believe that you have to check your brains at the door to follow Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, this is what I believe. That the further you go down into the depths of science, the further you can see with an electron microscope into the depths of the mysteries of life, or the further you can see into the heavens with the most powerful telescopes, both will lead you to a place where you must deal with the fact that this is all too magnificent for it just to happen by chance. And you will either believe in chance or you will believe in God. I don't believe in chance. I don't believe all this just happened, that we spun up from magic pixie dust and lightning just struck at the right moment and then things began to evolve. It's not good science. Let's just talk science to science. You have to defy the second law of thermodynamics. Either you believe in science or you don't, and if you embrace science as your path, then you must embrace it and be intellectually honest. Nothing can give rise to something. It just doesn't work. You can't have something where there was nothing. There has to be an energy, there has to be a creator, there has to be something behind it. Now, you, as a scientist, might be able to say, "No, I'm just not going to believe in God." That's fine, but let's start where you really are. You're not going to be intellectually honest. You're going to believe in things that take more faith than it takes to believe in God. The statistical odds of things just happening the way that some believe they just happened are more impossible than to believe in a God who created. You have more faith than I do. We have faith in different things, perhaps. And that's okay, because, we can talk about this, and if you wanted to grab some coffee sometime, I'd be glad to talk with you about this sort of stuff. But we need dangerous people that will dream big dreams and accomplish big things, that won't check their brains at the door, that you will become the best in your field. And I mean this, whether you're an athlete or whether you're a brainiac, whether you're a politician, whatever it is you do, I'm just asking you, man, use your brains. Wise men use their brains to follow Jesus. Let me give you some examples of this. There's a fellow named Francis Collins that's worth study. He was the leader of the Human Genome Project when it was launched, a project to map the DNA of a human from end to end, to map the coding that makes us human, and to dive into the depths of science, and to do the hard work that scientists have to do to pull that together. And yet, he is a vibrant follower of Jesus Christ. He's a scientist among scientists. He is not a slouch, and he is not lazy, and he does not do weak science. He does hard science, and he believes in Jesus Christ too. Both. It's possible. It's possible to do both. Another example from my life is that in my history, and I did youth ministry before this, had a couple of young people come through our ministry that were off the charts brilliant. I mean, they were brilliant. I'm talking about top of their class, max ACT scores, the whole deal. One of them wanted to become a nuclear physicist. And here's what's scary, he could have done it. It was just how his mind worked. I begged him to follow that path. He didn't. He did something else. He's in the ministry now. God is God, and I'm not in control of this young man's life, but let me just say this clearly to you. If I had my way, I'd rather him be a nuclear physicist. Do you know why? Because we need the best, brightest brains in the marketplace, rubbing shoulders with real-world people who don't believe in Jesus, who are never going to come to a church, who aren't going to hear a preacher, who aren't going to listen to cool Christmas songs, who aren't coming to our Christmas Eve service. They're not doing any of that. But you'll know them, and some of you are out in the marketplace right now, and you know them, and you rub shoulders with them, and you will be the only light they will ever see. And this young man, with all those brains in his head, could have walked into an environment that very few people have access to. He would have gone into corridors and hallways and labs all over the world and done things that none of us could hardly imagine. He would have had access to the best brains on the planet. And as a follower of Jesus Christ, he could have impacted them in ways that you just can't imagine. So my hope, my message to you, please, and if you got the brains to do it, do it. My roles, I love getting to do what I get to do. I'm uniquely gifted for this. This is where God tapped me on the shoulder. This is my thing. But it doesn't need to be your thing necessarily unless God calls you specifically to it. We need you to go and be the greatest person you can be in whatever endeavor you're called, especially in the sciences and in the engineering fields. We're giving up high ground as Christ followers these days. And honestly, I think some of it's because we're a little bit lazy sometimes. And we don't want to do the hard work of studying hard enough to become what we need to become. Don't you give up the high ground and be lazy as a Christ follower. We should be the best and the brightest. We should be the most aggressive in growing our minds and following Jesus both. Another young man, equally gifted but in a different direction, more down the lines of creative writing and thinking. Could have been a professor at any college, anywhere, any university, anywhere. And gave up on it because it was too hard. And it's his life. But I don't think he's living to the level he could have lived. And therefore, I think he may not be having the impact he could have had. So, my hope is that in this message today, that a few of you will hear. That there'll be one or two in this room that will hear me out and will take this seriously. And that you will make this the day you put a stake in the ground and you say, I will be the top of my class. I will be the best at what I do in honor of Jesus Christ. I will not hide behind my Christianity as a reason to be lazy or to be a slouch. But I will, as a follower of Jesus Christ, I will bring the best I have, my gold, my frankincense, and my myrrh, and I will lay it at the feet of Jesus as an offering to him, and then I will follow him with my whole body, soul, and mind. I'll bring the best I've got to him. That's my hope for you. Another example. This one is more from the political arena, but this was a brilliant young man who was born into privilege and power, who had position, who had everything going for him. I want to tell you what he did with it. I want to tell you what difference he made in the world. He was born in 1759 in Great Britain. He was in the same time frame as George Washington, but on the other side of the pond. He ran in elite social circles. He was born the son of wealthy merchants. He had access to people, privilege, power, everything that a young man could possibly want. Some people have argued that this young man may have been one of the greatest men in history. When he was coming through in his early teen years, late elementary school years, his parents sent him to live with his aunt and uncle. While he was living with his aunt and uncle, he was going there to get extra schooling in a special school. What his mom and dad did not know is that young William Wilberforce was being raised by this aunt and uncle who not only were really smart people and also very well-to-do, but had become a part of the Methodist tradition of Christianity and an evangelistic form of Methodism at that, who took following Jesus very seriously. And they began to teach William Wilberforce about Jesus and about following him in a way that was beyond casual Christianity. You see, in the time when William Wilberforce was being raised in Great Britain, the country was Christian. It was Christian. Everybody was a Christian. Most people went to church. Most people said they believed in Jesus. But the social elites knew in their hearts, it's okay to say that stuff and to show up at church, but really you don't need to take it too seriously. Don't get carried away with it. Just be cool about it. Believe in Jesus, but don't really follow him. But his aunt and uncle were serious followers of Jesus. And they were serious about influencing people with this good news of Jesus Christ, about bringing Christmas into the culture. When William's mom and dad heard what was going on, they couldn't get to him quickly enough. His mom came and snatched him from the house of his aunt and uncle and brought him home because they didn't want young William being influenced to follow Jesus that way. It's okay to say you like him, and it's even okay to say you believe in him and to show up at church, but heavens forbid, man, don't really follow him. I mean, my goodness, that'll mess everything up. And so mom and dad brought him home, and they raised him as a young aristocrat in that community, and he began to do all the things a young man would do of that age, and he joined gentlemen's clubs. There were 5 of them in London that he joined. And he frequented all these, and he met all kinds of famous people. He even met Benjamin Franklin at one point. So he had access to the most powerful, prominent people of his day. And he had the wealth and the position to take advantage of all that, and he traveled in those circles. And he kind of fell away from this idea about Jesus and was traveling a normal man's path, so to speak. And that made his mom and dad happy. Matter of fact, William Wilberforce was on such a rise to power in the political arena. He was so bright and could articulate himself so well. He was a good communicator. Was drawn to the debates of Parliament and to speaking there. He became a member of Parliament, and his best friend at 24 became the Prime Minister of Great Britain. They're young men, high-powered, influential young men, wealthy young men. William Wilberforce's mother becomes ill. And the diagnosis for her is that she has to move 1,200 miles south, across the Alps, south to the coast where it's warmer. And William agrees to help take her, and they have to take her by horse-drawn carriage, 1,200 miles. It's going to take a long time. Now, William knows this. So he's looking for a friend to travel with him, someone that would get in the carriage and just have something to do to pass the time. He didn't have all the stuff we have today. There was no iPad. There was no Sirius XM radio. There was nothing. I mean, it's just like you and a horse and what horses do and a carriage and a long way to go. So he finds a friend. He runs across this friend. They kind of happenstance run into each other in a town, and he begins to talk, and he invites his friend Isaac Milner to join him. Now, Isaac Milner had worked at the elementary school where William Wilberforce had been when he was an elementary school student. But since that time, Isaac Milner had gone on and pursued a whole new career himself. Isaac Milner was now working at Oxford University. Brilliant, smart man. Isaac Milner had become what's known as the Lucian Professor at Oxford University. Now, the Lucian Professor is among the brightest, most intelligent person on the planet. They specialize usually in mathematics and hard sciences. To give you an idea of people that have held the Lucian chair before, back in the past, Isaac Newton was a Lucian chair at Oxford. Recently, Stephen Hawking, Lucian chair. Isaac Milner was the Lucian chair. And that was the traveling companion for William Wilberforce, one of the brightest minds on the planet at that time, in a carriage with William Wilberforce. And on this long carriage ride, they talked about everything. They talked about science and math and politics. And to William Wilberforce's surprise, they talked about Jesus. What William Wilberforce did not know is that this bright, brilliant, scientific mind, this wise man, was also a follower of Jesus Christ. And Isaac Milner was no casual follower of Jesus Christ. He was sincere and strong and well-reasoned in his faith. And in that carriage ride, he began to discuss Jesus with William Wilberforce. And William had nowhere to go. Not only could he not get out of the carriage, but his intellect couldn't keep up with Milner's. Milner was smarter, and his arguments for faith in Christ were stronger than Wilberforce's arguments against the faith in Christ. And so William Wilberforce came to a time in his life, it was a crisis of sorts, because he knew to follow Jesus in a true way, in a way that was beyond the casual, culturally accepted, oh yeah, I'm a believer in Jesus thing, was going to cost him something. But somewhere in that carriage ride, William Wilberforce became a true wise man. And he brought his life to the feet of Jesus Christ. He submitted his will and his mind to following Jesus. And William Wilberforce's life changed. When the carriage ride was over and his mother was settled in and he returned to Parliament, he had a real crisis of faith. So much so that he thought, I think I'll just join the priesthood or become a preacher or something like that. I'm going to go live in a monastery somewhere, just study Scripture, because politics is rough, Parliament's rough, these people are mean. So I think if I'm going to follow Jesus, I need to go where people play nicer. He hadn't been in church work. Just kidding. But he went to visit an old friend, a former slave trader named John Newton. John Newton was a rector of a church in London, and his life had been radically ravaged by the love of Jesus, so much so that he had given up his slave trade. John Newton penned the words to the great hymn, Amazing Grace. That's the John Newton that William Wilberforce went to see. By the way, William Wilberforce went to see him at night, the way Nicodemus came to see Jesus at night, because he didn't want anybody to know he was going. He was afraid it would ruin his reputation in Parliament. So he slipped off to see John Newton and discussed his dilemma, thinking about going into being a pastor, a priest, doing something like that. And John Newton, in that moment, had the sense to say to William Wilberforce, who had all this power and position and prestige, why don't you stay where you are? Do what you are uniquely gifted to do. Serve at the highest level that you can. Do not settle for anything less than that. Stay in place. Follow Jesus there with your whole heart. But yes, engage that brilliant intellect and all those talents and abilities that God has given you. Do both. And I promise you, history was changed because he did. William Wilberforce went back to Parliament. He gave up his social life at the clubs. He did make some changes there, but he stayed in politics and he served. 2 years after his endeavor, after his encounter with John Newton, he wrote in his journal, he said, there's two things I'm going to give my life to. Number one, the repression of the slave trade. Number two, the reformation of manners. This is what he meant. Let me talk about the reformation of manners first. The culture in Great Britain at that time was corrupt, and it was harsh. It was a lot like the culture we experience here in America today. Alcoholism was rampant. People's lives were being torn apart by alcohol and laid waste by alcohol, and that was the number one scourge in that culture at that time. And people were just evil. 25% of the young women in London at that point were prostitutes. This was a rough culture. And he dedicated his life to making a difference by following Jesus and engaging his mind, both. The second thing, the slavery issue, was troubling to him. And there were debates in Parliament at that point about what they would do with slavery. And there were people using the same Bible for both sides of the argument. And Wilberforce engaged his intellect and his influence and his power, and it took decades of battles, most of which he lost. But just a few days before he died, slavery was repealed in Great Britain. It was a life well lived because wise men engaged their minds to follow Jesus. And William Wilberforce engaged his mind and he followed Jesus, both. And that's what we need today, guys. We need people that will do both. That will bring all that they have, the very best that you have, and put them at the feet of Christ and follow him with your whole hearts and be the best and the brightest at what you do. Become people that make a difference. I'll go back to Winston Churchill's quote. To every person there comes in their lifetime a special moment when you are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do a very special thing. When William Wilberforce followed through on his very special thing and slavery was repealed, do you understand that we have an African American president today because somehow, some way, and I don't care how you feel about Barack Obama, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that an African American has the highest post in the United States, and that is a brilliant accomplishment for our democracy. But it has its roots in the work of William Wilberforce, who engaged his mind and followed Jesus both. Both. What could happen in your life if you understood what that special tap on the shoulder is for you, and you engage your mind and you follow Jesus? What could change in the world? It could be magnificent, couldn't it? Who knows what could happen if you'll be the best scientist you can be, the best engineer you can be, the best teacher you can be. And yes, you're going to be a preacher, then be the best preacher you can be. But whatever God calls you to do it with your whole heart, with your whole mind, with all that you've got. Don't hold anything back. So when that special tap comes, let's look at this. What is your very special thing? What is it that you're called to do? I want you to do what you are called to do. And it's going to be different. Wouldn't it be something if this body of Christ here at Phos Community Church, each one of us follow our paths into where we're supposed to be, and we did our thing? Can you imagine the reach that we have when that goes on? It's unbelievable. When all of us engage in our very special thing, we call it mission at 1 degree, or M1D. When you are on your mission at 1 degree and you engage that, you change the world. And isn't that cool? I love that. How are you preparing for the work you're called to do? What's your star? What is it that you're supposed to do? Those wise men, they had a star to follow. Not very many people on the planet would have even noticed the star that they noticed. But there's things that you notice going on in the universe that only you or a handful of people like you notice. What's your special calling? What's your star? And then, what's true north for you? I want to give you a principle for following Jesus. I believe this is true. I believe that true north for everybody that would follow Jesus is to come and to bow at the feet of Jesus and to bring the best of who you are to him. To bring your gold, your frankincense, your myrrh, bring your most costly treasures and trust Jesus with them. Romans 12, 1 and 2 and Proverbs 3, 5 and 6 has a principle buried in it. It's this. Romans 12, 1 and 2 says this, that we should offer our bodies as a living sacrifice to God. And that when we do that, then we'll know what his will is. If you'll bring the best of who you are, the best of what you have to offer the world, and you'll lay it at the feet of Jesus as an act of worship, then you can trust that he's going to guide you. That he will send you on a mission that he will orchestrate. And he will open doors in front of you. And he will give you influence in ways you didn't know you could have influence, with people you didn't know you could influence. And the world will change because you offer yourself first to Christ. The Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 principle is this: trust the Lord with your whole heart. Don't lean on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths. So come by way of the manger first. Come to Jesus first, the way those wise men do. You know, I don't know what happened to the wise men. I don't know if they became true followers of Jesus after that because they were Zoroastrian priests most likely, and they worshiped Zoroaster. I don't know, but I got to believe that encounter with Jesus and the stories of Jesus as they learned on their journey probably changed their lives in a magnificent way. I know they gave us a powerful story, a story that represents that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord, no matter where you come from, no matter what little g God you worship right now, you will come to Jesus sometime, either now or later. You and your intellect, your brain, will bow to Jesus. So the true north for a Christ follower is to come by way of the manger to worship this Christ of Christmas. A mind is a terrible thing to waste. So don't check your brain at the door. Be the best at what you do. Be the top of your class. Be the best scientist you can be and follow that star. Because wise men, they use their brains to follow Jesus.